Whenever I look at a bone, I always see the fingerprints of the god who amused himself with sculpting it. Pablo Picasso. As art sometimes reflects nature, so in turn does nature occasionally reflect art. These bones and teeth and talons tell a story of living molecules beginning to reproduce themselves in an ancient sea and gradually crawling out onto dry land. A story of dynasties of giant complex creatures dominating the land, sea, and sky, descended from the tiniest and simplest of ancestors in an incredible chain of reproduction and diversification. A story of strength, ferocity, and gentleness in titanic proportions. In other words, the story of the ingenious adaptability of life in the face of death. For in this struggle we see dramatic evidence of nature's unrelenting exploratory forces at work. Viewed as a progression of sculptures, one could say that a distinct style emerges early and gradually refines itself over millions of years, sometimes simple, sometimes quite baroque, and usually astonishingly practical. A story without words, cleft by humankind from stone. Hello, everyone. My name is Alberto Acosta, and I'm the curator of the Museum of Ancient Wonders, located here in Cathedral City in a storefront gallery. We're here to introduce the idea of creating museum diversity, with a focus on the world of ancient civilization and prehistoric life, a rarity in museums here in the Coachella Valley. In fact, this museum is more than 30 years in the making. Back in the 1980s, when the story of evolution was being excised from public education, we decided to meet with some of the greatest paleontologists and paleoanthropologists of our country to create an exhibition which we have titled Paleo, the Story of Life. After traveling for more than 30 years, and having been viewed by more than 5 million people, we, after a great deal of research, decided to look for a permanent location for these collections so that they would never have to travel again. And so in our research, when we discovered that the greater Coachella Valley didn't have a museum with worldwide archaeology or paleontology or paleoanthropology or cultural anthropology, we decided that Palm Springs would be the best place to install these collections in a prominent building to serve as museum diversity for this generation and many generations to come. In 2018, at the beginning of this process, I was sitting at a piano bar, ruminating about where we were going to open this museum and how we were going to afford to do it. A young man came and sat next to me. He was an intriguing individual. He sat down next to me, and like everyone else in Palm Springs, when you sit down next to a stranger, you say, well, what are you doing here? And when I told him that I was here to create museum diversity for the Valley, he put his glass down on the counter and he asked me, well, do you need any help? And his name is Joseph McCabe.
I am the Director of Development here at the Museum of Ancient Wonders, the business end, do a little bit of everything. When you're basically a two-man show, you do it all. But that's one of the things that's so exciting about it. Growing up in Philadelphia, every Sunday, practically, I was at a museum with my parents. So I've always loved museums, so the opportunity to work at a museum was exciting.
As a result of Joe McCabe joining me in this venture to create these museums, he worked very hard with a very important art gallery known as Heather James Fine Arts. And as a result of his efforts, Heather James Fine Arts donated more than 100 genuine antiquities from Asia, representing China, Japan, and the nations of Southeast Asia, more than 24 African nations, representing more than 31 indigenous communities, a magnificent collection of original antiquities from Mesoamerica and from the Native American tribes of our nation. The African masks and sculpture are now known as Behind the Mask, Ancient Traditions, Rituals, and Mysticism of Ancient Africa. The Asian artifacts we curated to become all under heaven, which is what the ancient Chinese would say when they were happy with their dynastic rulers. And we divided the artifacts into 3 sections: artifacts that would have been used by the living, the temple icons of Buddha and Shiva, and finally ending with artifacts that would have been placed in the tombs of the elite.
We set up the exhibits that Alberto had. We acquired the wonderful collections from Heather James. We are looking for more space, but it's been a great place to start here in Cathedral City. And we're looking towards the future.
Hello everyone, I'm Lauren Nile, and I'm a resident here in the desert and am delighted to be speaking with you today about the Museum of Ancient Wonders. We came in here roughly about 3 weeks ago. Even though we had seen the museum several times over the last several months, we hadn't come in, but were always intrigued by it. So finally we decided, since we had out-of-town guests, that it would be a good idea to come in and check it out. And we are so glad, so delighted that we did, because we just loved what we saw here in the Museum of Ancient Wonders. I like very much the fact that the museum is really comprehensive, historically speaking, going from Lucy, our great-great-great-great-great-great-grandmother. I mean, the woman who, according to archaeologists, anthropologists, probably even DNA scientists, is the great-great-grandmother of us all the way up to spacewalks, walks that our astronauts have made in space. As a person of African descent, really appreciate the fact that the Museum of African History has a wonderful exhibit of African art and African masks. I was really delighted to see that, because so often African history is just not known and not acknowledged. But even in a museum such as this, which is a local museum to my neighborhood, I'm happy to say, there's a very nice exhibit of African art and African masks, etc. So I was very delighted to see that. I'm also happy that the founders and I guess the curators of the museum are also planning to start the first ever international LGBTQIA museum. And I think that that is a fabulous idea.
After establishing the Museum of Ancient Wonders as a nonprofit organization here in Cathedral City in temporary storefront galleries, we sat down and wondered what other museums would fill the needs of the residents here and the visitors of the greater Palm Springs area. And we looked at the population and decided, well, let's form an additional museum known as the LGBTQ World History Museum, a 10,000-year arc that chronicles the history of rulers and warriors, scientists and artists and activists that have made essential contributions to our society and to civilization as a whole.
When you have a group of people like the LGBTQ community, or people of African descent, or people of Asian descent, or Hispanic American descent, about whose history so many of us know very little, subconsciously, I think the thought, unfortunately, but understandably, in the minds of many is, well, they're not in the history books because they haven't done anything. If they had done something, they'd be in the history books.
The Palm Springs area is unique, having a very large LGBTQ population and also being a large LGBTQ tourist destination. The museum is going to add something to this. It's going to become a community center, a cultural center. It's a very unique and exciting exhibit, and it's unique enough that the California LGBTQ Legislative Caucus is very behind us. They're very supportive, and they're helping make this happen.
So in the next year or two, we will be working with the LGBTQ Legislative Caucus in Sacramento, along with all of the local LGBTQ organizations, to make that museum a reality. Because we think an LGBTQ World History Museum containing a 10,000-year arc of LGBTQ experiences will become a national and international destination.
So where are we going now? We're in a small storefront. We can't display all of our exhibits at once, so we rotate them. And everyone is very happy with everything that they see. But we're working on getting a larger building, a place where we can have everything on exhibit at once, and where we can grow, where we can bring in traveling exhibits, where we can have a gift shop, where we can have community events.
We are now in search of a building that would be able to contain a 40,000 square foot museum of natural history and archaeology, and a museum that could contain an immersive exhibit based on the history of LGBTQ experiences throughout the millennia. So now, as a process, we are looking for that building, and there are several considerations to be made, and one of them is in the heart of Palm Springs.
So I am really happy that here in the Museum of Ancient Wonders, the hopefully soon to becoming LGBTQIA International Museum of History will showcase all of the incredible achievements of the LGBTQ community, and that is something that we all need to learn more about.
It takes a lot to start this museum, the LGBTQ World History Museum. We are always happy to talk to you about it, tell you more about it, let you know how you can be a part of it, and we're just so excited to have this happen.
It's also an opportunity to raise the quality of life for the residents and for our senior citizens who are looking to continue their education. And museums are the educational, cultural, and economic engine of the regions that they are in. So with museum diversity, we are raising the level of consciousness in our municipalities for an appreciation of history from ancient to modern times.